My show Consider looks at the concept of knowledge and how just having more knowledge doesn't necessarily solve the problems in society, because two people can look at the same thing and come to very different conclusions about it based on their experiences, the things that they've been taught, and how they see the world. And so I've kind of addressed what that looks like when we come up against big issues in society, what it looks like in personal relationships, and then what it looks like in relationship to yourself. So I have 9 paintings that deal with various issues in society, and looking at how when we focus so much on getting our own opinion across, we sometimes miss that people are at the heart of these issues, and that there's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that people are safe and secure and loved and taken care of, and that we're being good neighbors. Kind of the second movement is a series of portraits that I did of friends that are a look at how, as much as you might know somebody, as long as you've been in relationship with them, even with a very deep friendship, there's always more to know about someone. And there's always more to them than just what you see or how you understand them. And then finally, there's some collage pieces that kind of track the internal journey that I took as I researched and discovered and created through this process. And so I'm super excited to get to take you on this walkthrough of the pieces in my show. Fishers of Men is a painting that looks at the refugee crisis around the world and asks the question, what is our responsibility to people that aren't from our culture or our country? If you look on the right hand of the canvas, you'll see a bunch of rocks. I took these rocks from a walkway by my house. These are rocks that are often stepped on or passed over, but I picked them up and I washed them off and I anointed them with oil, because these rocks represent the 3.5 million people that were seeking asylum in 2019. And I wanted to demonstrate in every action that I took that these people that the rocks stand for are truly human, they're worthy of dignity, and they're certainly worthy of more assistance than maybe our government's willing to provide. In the top right, you'll see one rock that stands for 18,000 people. As of 2019, that was the cap set by our government to limit the number of refugees or asylum seekers that would be accepted in 2020. And I'm sure that number's changed now because of COVID and a lot of the laws that have changed in the last couple of months. Which is why I think it's important that we ask the question, what is our responsibility to humans who have been displaced by war, persecution, and natural disaster? Love Your Neighbor is a painting that looks at the history of racism in the United States, kind of specific to the state of Missouri. And it asks the question of, who are we listening to, and who are our teachers? We all come to things in this world with personal bias. Our experiences and understandings form how we see the world and how we interpret what we see. And so the voices we choose to listen to can help shape how we see the world, because they can obscure, they can open up our vision. They can keep us comfortable, or they can disrupt our interpretations of the way things are or the way we think they should be. So who are you listening to? Some of the people in this painting are some of the strongest voices that I've listened to in my life. They're poets, artists, mothers, activists, singers, preachers, and actors. Some I only know from afar, and some I know personally, but each has helped me to see past myself, to look at my neighbor, and to see their struggles and their triumphs, and to be interested in understanding their history and how to make our world more just and more loving for all of us. When we take the time to listen to Black voices and Black people, we take time to truly love our neighbor and to understand a history that most of us do not know well enough. And we have an opportunity to make our spaces more just and more equitable, more compassionate, and to make our world a better place. Done to Them, You've Done It to Me is a painting that looks at the consequences and effects of homophobia in society and the power that love can have to bring life. And it asks us the question of just exactly what are the consequences for our actions or even our inaction. What we know, what we believe, and what we desire or want drives what we say and especially what we do. So do our actions prove that our hearts are full of love, peace, and generosity, or do they prove that they're full of bitterness, fear, or hate? In this painting, you might notice down in the bottom left-hand corner the strings of beads. They are a visual representation of how the lack of acceptance and the lack of love can correlate to much higher suicide attempts in the LGBTQIA community. The bottom strand stands specifically for the trans community, as 41% of all trans people have attempted suicide at some time in their life. We have the opportunity every day to extend peace, to show love, and to give of our time and attention generously. We have the opportunity to try to bring about goodness, wholeness, and community with our actions. And we have the opportunity every day to give life to somebody by loving them and accepting them for who they are. It starts with us considering how we can strive for integrity between our thoughts, our words, and our actions, and how we can embrace someone in an authentic desire to love them and to be in community with them. I Thirst is a painting that looks at the migrant crisis along our southern border, and it asks the question of, how can people be illegal? And should we consider it wrong to give water to someone who is dying of thirst, even if they're considered to be a criminal? There's a group out there who says no, and that it's our responsibility as human beings to provide water, clothing, food, and other necessities for migrants crossing the desert. And those are the people that inspired this painting. Regardless of what you might believe about immigration, we have to ask ourselves the question of how can we call ourselves just or righteous or peace-loving if we would also condemn people to suffer? And how can we claim to care about life and about the family, and yet allow our government to destroy families and traumatize children? It shouldn't be wrong to want a better, safer life for yourself and your family, and that's part of the American dream after all. If we want to heal the divides in our country, and if we want to bring love and understanding back into our conversations, we need to build more tables and less walls. And so we have to consider for ourselves, where can we do that today? What she has done is a beautiful thing, is a painting that looks at survivors of sexual assault, and it asks us to consider, what do we really know about sexual assault and about the people that survive it? I hope you've never had to experience the confusion, horror, and pain of being assaulted. And if you've never had this experience, it can be hard to understand survivors when they tell their stories. But there's absolutely no excuse for not educating ourselves. There's so many great resources out there to help understand what we can do to be more compassionate listeners and more active advocates on behalf of women and men, girls and boys who have been sexually assaulted. In educating ourselves, we learn how to better love and care for victims of abuse. We learn how to spot warning signs, how to prevent people from harming the innocent, and we learn how to hold perpetrators accountable, not out of vengeance, but out of a love for justice. We learn how to walk with people as they navigate the hard road to being a survivor. I highly encourage you to look up Rachel Denhollander's book, What a Girl's Worth, or the Netflix documentary Athlete A, as starting places in understanding. I hope we all take time to consider how we can become more compassionate listeners instead of uncaring cynics who don't believe victims when they tell their stories, or ask for our help in trying to get justice for the things that have happened to them. That They Might Have Abundant Life is a painting that looks at Native Americans in the United States, and it asks us to consider how we undo years of trauma and how we make restitution for our history. It also asks us to take Native peoples out of a place of near invisibility in our society and to instead learn to look and to listen to their stories. On this canvas is a VHS film reel and a tiny Declaration of Independence. The VHS reel reminds us that Native peoples and Native culture are so much more than what most of us learn from movies or even in school. And the Declaration reminds us that most of our most treasured political documents still don't want to be applied to people that they call savages. There's so much beauty, strength, humor, and wisdom to be found amongst Native peoples, but it means we have to listen, and we have to consider, and we have to be willing to be taught by voices that we don't often listen to. So how do we atone for what our ancestors did? We start by considering, and we start by understanding and seeing Native peoples as human beings and getting interested in discovering what they have to say. Don't Despise These Little Ones is a painting that looks at how we sometimes do not actually treat babies, children, or teenagers like they're really people. And so the question we have to consider is, why is this? Why don't we listen to them? Older generations give the gift of the world to younger generations, and so we have to ask ourselves, what kind of a world do we plan to leave behind us? And if it will be left to those generations following us, why do we not listen to them more, and why don't we allow ourselves to be taught by them and to include them in the process of creating this world and making it a better place? Babies, children, and teens, they're people just like our adults are people. They have the same types of emotions, they have similar needs, and they often live through the same types of experiences. They may not be able to express themselves as adults can, but that does not mean that they do not have wisdom and knowledge to impart. The pandemic and the subsequent shutdowns have given many of us an opportunity to interact with the next generation on a day-to-day basis. So how can you invest in listening to them today? There's a quote that runs across the whole of this painting, and it's from a Johnny Cash song called The Lonely Voice of Youth. and one verse in particular always stands out to me. It says, "The young girl dancing to the latest beat has found new ways to move her feet. The young man speaking in the city square is trying to tell somebody that he cares. Yeah, the ones that you're calling wild are going to be the leaders in a little while. This old world's wakened to a newborn day, and I solemnly swear that it'll be their way. You better help the voice of youth find what is truth." Whitewashed Tombs is about the tendency that religion has to become corrupt when it gets too closely associated with power or with money. And it asks us to consider just exactly what is religion for. Is it for human flourishing and to teach us to be kinder and more generous towards our world? Or is it really about gaining status, power, and wealth for our belief system? Is human flourishing synonymous with the American dream? This piece was inspired by a story that I read last year about a preacher who got his congregation to donate money towards a third private jet because flying commercial meant people would stop him and ask him to pray for them. But some of the direction of this painting morphed as politics in the last year have made it hard to tell where the division between church and state lies. As a Christian and a follower of Jesus, I personally find it disgusting and deeply disturbing that a faith that was supposed to break the chains of the oppressed and give hope to the hopeless, and make space for the stranger and practice radical love and generosity towards friend and foe, has instead been co-opted by fear and the rapacious need for power, prestige, and wealth and status. If that's what drives your beliefs, regardless of what religion you do or don't practice, it can never deliver on promises to make this life one worth living. Religion that's only ever really about power, status, and money can never possibly bring hope. It can't teach us to be kind and generous, and it certainly can't promote human flourishing in the world. All it can do is continue to create conflict and division between people. And so I ask you to consider, if you're a person of faith, any faith, what can you do today to choose to love and to seek after the welfare of others instead of after your own? The painting See and Hear, Look and Listen is kind of the oddball of the group of paintings because it's not about one specific issue, but it's instead an opportunity for you, the viewer, to get to participate in the show. If you get to go and view the show in person, you have the opportunity to write on the tags or on the leaves that are on the painting. Anything that comes to mind as you view the show. It could be one word, it could be an emotion, it could be a thought, a quote, anything. Whatever this show kind of draws out of you and gets you to consider, I would ask that you consider writing it down and creating kind of a living memorial to what people have learned and understood from the work that I've done, and to be able to share that with other people that come into the gallery and view the show. I created a series of 6 portraits to try to take the show from kind of a more global perspective into a more personal realm, and to look at how personal relationships can change how we see the world, and they can help us to consider new ways of living and being in the world. Each of these portraits was a collaboration between me and the person that I did the portrait of. So one half of the portrait is their interpretation of how they see themselves, and the other half of the portrait is my interpretation. And each of them was a really awesome opportunity to actually get to know people better and to be able to share kind of that conversation of how just because I know someone, even if I've known them my entire life, doesn't mean I know everything there is to know about them. There's always more to learn, and there's always more to be gained by stopping and listening to someone else's experience. The first one of these is my friend Shayd. Shayd and I met at college, and we've shared quite a few classes together, which is how I got to know quite a bit about him and his story. And so I wasn't super surprised when he announced that he was beginning to perform in drag shows, but at the time I realized I didn't actually understand that much about drag. And over the past 4 years, I've learned a lot about drag and the culture, and Shayd has been really instrumental in helping me to understand. Since Shayd was in the process of moving, we had to collaborate a little bit more virtually to create his portrait. He loves and is really very inspired by music, and so in the background are lyrics from some of his favorite songs, which was a joy because I got to listen to some new songs that I had never heard before. I also wanted to give an homage to how he creates a lot of his own costumes for the shows that he performs and competes in, and so everything on his portrait is handmade or hand-fastened in some way or recycled from other things. And it was through the process of making the flowers and attaching the jewels and the chains to things, and that I gained a whole new appreciation just for the artistry and the ingenuity that he displays as a drag queen. And I'm just absolutely pleased to be able to get to share this with you. Number 2 is my friend Norah. I met Norah 2 years ago when she was 3, and our families were introduced to each other by a mutual friend at church. Norah is an artist, and even though there are a lot of years that separate us, I consider us to be artistic equals. She draws what she sees in her world and how she feels about it, and she isn't afraid to share it, and to me, that's what makes an artist. It doesn't matter if you're 5 or 105. Norah told me that for her portrait, she wanted to use words that described herself and words about things that she likes, just like I do sometimes, which is super flattering. On her part of the picture, you can see some of the words that she used, and others she's kind of hidden, including the word art that's written on her eye. She told me she had trouble getting it to show up, and so we problem solved together to make it visible so that people could see the word art in her eye. My favorite parts are the items that I collaged on. They're based off of 5 things that she told me that she liked. And they were burritos, family and Jesus, art, animals, and the beach. But not necessarily in that order. There's a lot of joy and beauty and just wisdom to be found when we take time to listen to and include the next generation. And now you guys get to share in that too. Micaela is another friend that I met in college. She was one of the first people to take time to get to know me when I first got to school. As she was a grade above me, and she was always so gracious to me the entire time that we were in school together. She's taught me a lot about what it looks like to become a citizen of this country, as she grew up in the jungles of Ecuador, and even though we have so much that is different about us, there's still a lot that we share in common, and it was an honor to get to collaborate with her on her portrait. She told me she used acrylic paint because she is something of a perfectionist, and it allowed her to be really precise. But she also liked to use a variety of bright and bold colors because it represents the brightness and diversity of Latin culture, and the natural elements represent the beauty of Latin American landscapes. The words that she used represent descriptions of herself in both English and Spanish, and kind of look at the bilingual nature of her life. The elements that I added, I also noted on them what I know her for, which is being a leader, raising a beautiful and strong daughter, and for being a truly loving human being. Number 4, Mark, is a portrait of my dad, and it was weirdly both the easiest and the hardest one that I did. It's also the last piece that I completed for the show, which could have contributed some to it being really difficult to finish. He and I collaborated on a lot of it, and it took a long time for us to both decide what elements to include. My dad turned 60 this year, and in a couple weeks he'll become a grandpa for the first time. He's lived a lot of lives, and he's carried a lot of titles throughout his life. But I think the one that he is most proud of is husband and father. Those are not easy roles, and in the 31 years I've been alive, I've seen him struggle and fail to be a good husband and a good dad. But I've also witnessed him get back up every time and try again and again until he gets it right. His part of the portrait process was a little bit like that. He allowed himself to be vulnerable and to try something different for me, and when he made a mistake, we fixed it together. He's an old white man by society's standards, and we've had our fair number of disagreements in the past couple of years. But like with his portrait, he allows me to be in conversation with him as an equal, and we're able to grow and learn from each other, because at the end of the day, we share a last name and a desire to continue to be in relationship with each other and to continue to try to learn from each other and understand each other as more than just stereotypical boomers or millennials. Number 5, Eryka, is of my friend Eryka, who I met through my sister as they were roommates together in grad school. Eryka is one of the very first openly out lesbians that I've ever personally gotten to know, and it's through getting to know her and her girlfriend Nikki that I've been able to broaden my understanding and help kind of sort through a lot of the inherent prejudices that I had kind of unconsciously picked up about gay and lesbian people. She created her piece mostly with paint. She specifically painted it black and gray and white so that way the different pieces on her shirt would show up. They're all things that help describe different parts of who she is, like her Puerto Rican and Italian ancestry, the fact that she's gay, the fact that she loves playing sports and is currently involved and employed in a collegiate sports program, the fact that she's a 90s kid, loves cartoons, or various hobbies. But one of the parts of the drawing that I think is the coolest is the top part, and I want to read just a little piece that she wrote about it. She said, the last area within my piece that I wanted to showcase was my life's journey thus far. I think it is important to always remember where you came from and cherish the times where you are at currently, because you never know where life may take you. I've made so many great friends along the way because of this, and it really makes you grow and evolve more as a person through all of these experiences. The last one of the portraits is No. 6, Dymond. I got to know Dymond through my friendship with her mom, and I remember being instantly struck just by her grace and her laugh. She can be kind of quiet when you first meet her, but she radiates love and beauty. I've watched over the past couple of years as she's grown more and more into who she is. She told me that she chose to collage on the words she did because she wanted to empower other women not to compare themselves to others, but instead to speak encouraging words over themselves. It reminded her of her favorite Bible verse, which is, I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. What you wouldn't know just by looking at her, though, is that Dymond struggles with deafness and has a cochlear implant to help her hear. She's had to work twice as hard as most kids her age to hear and to make herself be heard. I've been so inspired by her and her journey as a young woman, and I've learned so much from her and her mom, Tracy, whose face also happens to be in Love Your Neighbor. And I've especially learned a lot from her in the wake of the George Floyd murder and the conversations that we've had over the course of this summer. When I asked Dymond what she would want people to know about her portrait, she said the reason that she went with collage was to show how she had grown, matured, and felt more comfortable in her skin, and with the Black Lives Matter movement. She said, I was very insecure of what I looked like. I want to see change in this world. This world is missing love. We as people need to learn how to love on people whether or not we disagree with their lifestyle. And she hopes that we all get inspired to educate ourselves about the Black community. The third movement of the show is a series of 5 collage pieces that explore the various emotions, thought, and inspirations that shape me throughout the process of making the pieces for this show. There are song lyrics, there are post-it note quotes, there's bits of leftover articles and pictures that I didn't use in the main paintings, and I reused all of these things to help explore what I learned in my journey. The first of the collages is Listen and Lament, and it focuses on the grief and anguish that I often felt during this process. For every piece in the show, I did a ton of research, whether it was books or podcasts, documentaries, movies, going to symposiums, having conversations with friends. I tried to practice what I preach and listen, but in the process, my heart got broken a lot. And I am not by nature a very emotional person, and so finding ways to process the grief that I felt and the frustration and the hurt was really difficult. I'm lucky to have a really great support system who knows how to draw things out of myself, but at the end of the day, an artist's journey is kind of a solitary one, and the only thing I have to help process the anger, the sadness, and the frustration is to paint. Both the words listen and lament have the connotation of sitting with something for a while. None of the issues that I explore in my show are going away anytime soon, and in this era of pandemic, everyone is dealing with extra trauma and loss. We have to be willing to embrace our own grief, and we have to be prepared to consider how to sit with someone else in theirs. Until we can join in lament and really listen to others, we are going to be really hard-pressed to make the kind of change that we want to see in the world. Silent Screaming explores the struggle I sometimes have with words. Even though I don't express a lot of emotion, that doesn't mean I don't feel emotions really deeply. A lot of my problem is I just don't often know how to communicate exactly what I'm feeling or to put it into words that make sense, which is a lot of the reason why I paint and why I create. Fear of what other people think is often what keeps me silent, and working on the show allowed me to have the chance to speak with some authority and some confidence through the paintings and through the collages. But in the process, I found that I have the courage to have tough conversations with people and to not just smile and nod on the outside while disagreeing on the inside. Silent Screaming also chronicles the struggle to find ways to speak up that are truthful and honest, but not cruel and demeaning to others in the process. One of my inspirations for this was the late Chadwick Boseman, who spoke honestly about his experiences and thoughts and understandings, but who never did it in a rude or demeaning way. This piece I've created as a small tribute to him and as a way to honor the contributions he made as an artist. It also became a way of processing kind of the grief and shock that came from finding out that he had passed away. I made it the night after he had passed, and I found that it was one more way of channeling emotions and channeling thoughts and feelings into art and finding a way to speak that hopefully communicates to other people as well. Peacemaker reflects something of a new core conviction I came to in the process of the show. Not new so much in never thought of it before, but new in that it became important in a way that it never had before. And that was that we have got to root out violence from our hearts. Violence in our hearts becomes violence in our thoughts, which becomes violence in our speech and our actions. And if we ever hope to love our neighbor and to affect change and to be able to consider others, we have got to make peace a reality within ourselves. Peace is not just the absence of conflict, but it's being made whole, and that the enmity within ourselves or between ourselves and each other or ourselves and the earth, or if you believe in God or some other kind of higher power, between ourselves and the divine, has to be worked through and done away with. Peace is not a passive thing. Things like kindness, justice, love, peace, unity, they're nouns that are totally meaningless if they don't soon become verbs. It's not enough to know about things like peace and love and justice if we do not also practice things like peace and love and justice. So being a peacemaker is being willing to step into messy, broken, and conflicted situations, and instead of drawing up battle lines or building walls, we tear down everything that prevents our recognizing another person's humanity, and we actively use whatever gifts, talents, and resources we have to bring wholeness and healing to the place we're in. When we consider others, when we embrace them, when we bear each other's burdens, and when we choose fearless action to love and to make peace instead of making war, when we consider by listening and by resolving to root out violence out of our own hearts and minds, we have the opportunity to actually change the world and make it into the place that we hope it can be. Joy and Discovery looks at how, even in the struggle, there is always beauty and hope. We just have to be on the lookout for it. Sometimes it is about our attitude. It's about choosing to look at life with eyes of love and not fear. But sometimes we also have to do more to find joy. We have to actively participate. And for artists, that means we have to be creating. One of the things I found to be amazing was how quickly artists pivoted in this pandemic season. That when the shutdowns descended, most of the artists I follow on social media not only didn't stop creating, but they created more, and that their work deepened in significance, and that they found just incredibly innovative ways to share hope in the midst of loss and uncertainty. One of those artists is the man that's featured in this painting, which he's an artist from New York named Mako Fujimura. He talks a lot about how artists need to care for culture in the same way that a therapist would care for a patient. We listen, we challenge, and we instill hope. And we don't allow ourselves to get trapped into culture wars, but instead we find ways to heal the ecosystems we find ourselves creating in. The quote of his that's featured on this also features a quote from T.S. Eliot, and it reminds me to not quit when it gets hard or discouraging, but instead to press on towards the end goal and find joy in the process of discovery. Faithful in Little Things is probably the most pandemic-y of the pieces that I created for this show. It looks at how the pandemic upset all of the plans that I had for this show, but that in the end, the mission and the goal didn't really change. If anything, the need for people to consider others is even more urgent now than it was when I first pitched the idea to the Kranzberg a year ago. This piece reflects on things I told myself when I got unsure or afraid. Learning how to not be afraid, how to speak truth in love, how to adapt to new situations daily are just not just lessons for a painter with a show, they're lessons for all of us in this season of upheaval. In the background is a mother holding her child, which I see as an homage to my mom, who helped me process so much for this show, even while she was emotional support to my dad and my other siblings. She's so often embodied to me what it means to listen and to consider and to speak truth in love. She also taught me the lesson that undergirds the whole show, which is that people are more important than things. When she taught that to me, it was mostly in reference to sharing with my brothers and sisters, but it's a lesson that I think means even more now as an adult than it did as a child. It means that people are more important than things, than money, than politics, than power, status, comfort, convenience, security, religion. People are more important than anything else that we can come up with, and they have to matter most. And that is why we take the time to consider, we take the time to listen, we take the time to make space within ourselves, to ask questions, to be curious about others, and to not just assume that what we know is the way that things always have to be, but to instead walk a mile in somebody else's shoes and humbly believe that there's something that they can teach us about the world that we would not know otherwise. I want to thank you for taking the time to view the pieces of the show. I hope you get a chance to see them in person, but that if you don't, that you've been able to learn something from this virtual tour as well. And I just want to thank you again for taking the time to support my work. By spending a little time considering some big questions in life, I hope that you take some of these questions, that you personalize them to your own life, and that you consider ways that you can be a better listener, a better neighbor, that you can be a more loving and active advocate for the people that need help in this world. And that if you are one of those people that needs somebody to stand up for them, that needs somebody to look on them with love, my hope and prayer is that you find people that are willing to come into your life and to listen to your story and to consider that you are important. And it's been my privilege to be able to share these things with you. Thanks.